Hello. I'm continuing an introduction that I began in 2018 to introduce myself and how I am creating a life with others and leaving a story behind because it needs to be done. Because so many people deserve what is happening today regarding immortality and the human genome and the human consciousness, of which we all are privy to, at least those that may be able to follow who I am and what I am. Most people have no clue who I am or who most people are on the planet. And I find that quite curious that now, with the introduction of the way that we communicate in cyberspace, that we don't know more about each other. So this is my hope for humanity, that we learn as we go, because life is so short on the planet and global communication is so important. I'm reaching out today as a human on the planet, with knowing that here, where I was born in America, that we are uh, celebrating and laying a soul to rest one of our well known presidents, George W. Bush. And I was privileged to know him, having lived in Houston, Texas, and growing up as a teenager, and introduced to people because I was a Houston Spinneret. And I would like to suggest that we always keep our arts, culture, science, and technology available to all humans on the planet, as it was my growing up with wonderful talent and skills offered me through the educational system on the planet, especially in the Americas and the United States of America. So, with that said, I will introduce myself as one who was born on the planet. I have an American birth certificate, which apparently is very important these days, just to be located and understood that one is an American citizen in the United States of America. Much has changed since the birth and death of George W. Bush. And the only reason that I'm using that date is because I was very well touched spiritually and emotionally and mentally, physically, and soul level by immortality through this man, President George W. Bush, who I was introduced to along with President Reagan. Now, not at the same time in Houston. I was a very young brunette, hazel eyes, very starstruck uh, student of Houston, Texas, and I was allowed to meet President Reagan at an affair at the Astrodome, or actually it was a center there where we had conferences. And so I was introduced to President Reagan there. And I don't remember the year, uh, but I know that my government connected security clearances began in May 1967 with Yvonne McCutcheons, who actually offered this, working for the government and going to Washington, D.C., uh, May 10th, 1967. And that is chronicled or kept as historical documentation. And my name was I was born Teresa Jeanette Thurmond. And I used the name Ginger in school, and that's because when I transferred from Louisiana to Houston, there were already 3 Jans in my class, and it was towards the end of the year in my 9th grade. So the teacher asked us on a break to come up with a new name, and Ginger came up. So I was actually born with black hair, and red hair was in our Irish side of our family. And my hair is pure white and has been for many, many years since I left the military. But I'm going to do my best to be as human and compassionate as I can by introducing this, just because I'm an old lady now. I'll be 67 December 26, 19. Well, I was born on 1951, but I'm impressed here in 2018 with the passing of the late, sounds funny, doesn't it, late George W. Bush, to reconcile our differences, that my husband and I worked in intelligence and security and the government, and it dates back to me and my first husband, Stephen Lee Parrish, who was chosen by Chris Kraft at that time to work for NASA. Now, there was a Vietnam War, well, we called it, it was really a police action, I believe, to be quite historically correct. But I want to make this introduction to me, to those that missed me for all those many years when I was a young teenager and I had a lot of energy and wanted to work for our government and to learn about all the things about life and death, and how I personally had, I've got one side of my face, how I personally had been hurt from childhood. I died several times in my lifetime. And so I follow a cosmic consciousness that I think I can't say that I know about the universal origin or even my origin. I can only tell you what I've been programmed to say and to know based on historical documentation, like my birth certificate here as an American citizen. So starting with that, one might go back and find on YouTube where myself, Teresa J. Morris, has a YouTube. I began a story with white hair, and that's my natural hair, by the way. This is thanks to technology, I guess one might say, but I like the color, and my mother wore it well, and her mother, so they had some natural hair color in there, but that's just for the sake of looking as human as possible. Now, why would I bother being a nobody among people on the planet, want to use live YouTube to introduce myself when all these beautiful children are using it for communication today? And they'll look at this and think, oh my gosh, this lady and her interest in universal source origin, and how she met these people that were presidents of the United States. Maybe this is a platform or foothold for me to just say that there were people before you and before we had this service as the internet on the planet. Not saying that it didn't exist. I'm saying that there were people that lived before you, before we had the internet. And I was one of the fortunate ones that learned, fortunate people, I guess, are students, because I was a teenager once, born in Monroe, Louisiana, raised in, went through Ransom Elementary. Before that was Plum Street. So I went Plum Street, Ransom Elementary. Then I went to West Monroe Junior High, Riser Junior High, and then West Monroe High School, then Hamilton Junior High, and then, which sounds funny, but the ninth was in Houston, was the ninth grade, and then James Madison High, and then went on to Alvin Junior College and slept and took some tests there and made straight A's. And so I knew I wanted to go into law enforcement, criminal justice, and psychology. So as the world turns out, my grandfather was a police officer, and I learned about the military growing up because my grandmother, where I was born in Monroe, Louisiana, she had a home that had belonged to Air Force, and she purchased that from the government. So I have a long history with people in and out of my family in the military, in the Air Force, My father was Army and Coast Guard, and I chose the United States Navy. Served me well. I served it. I took an oath of office to protect my country from both foreign and domestic. And this was long before we had Homeland Security. And I was very pleased to have been a part of watching that grow with family members or family members that married into our family. So I've seen a lot of growth in my country, our educational system, how children grow up. I had 4 of my own, 4 beautiful daughters. They're all in their 40s now. And today I was touched spiritually with a part of me that touches everything and everybody. We're all connected. So I'm hoping that this gets to those that need to know me on a personal basis, because they know, if they've been in my life at all in the past 20 years, how hard it is for me to come forth and make a video when I feel less than in human form. Because being human, we have emotions that when we're on the other side, and I say this with a knowing because I died, and I know I died and saw the light and angels several times. And I believe that my cosmic consciousness gave me the ability to be connected to a family that we call it heaven. Those of us that are believers in ascension, and that who do they say I am was at one time Yahshua, or Jehovah, or Jesus, or through the Holy Spirit. We have this magical mystery tour that we're all on. And there are people that are in my life that don't believe in who I am and what I do, because they're close to me in a 3-dimensional way, as a mother or a sister, a daughter, or aunt. And they don't really understand me. And I wonder how many people are truly misunderstood in the families that are given to us or we are born into. And that's for everybody on the planet. And I hope this gets translated, because to many people, I will just be another human that's using YouTube. And I'm not making money at this, by the way. I'm sure most of y'all know that the people that own YouTube, Google, and all those people that have offered us this service, they work with us. And some of them become very, very wealthy over these tools they offer us. Now, I do pay my part on the internet and media, and I've chosen to start a company called American Communications Online just for friends of mine, because there's so many people in the world and on the planet that are like me, but they don't know how to express it. And now that I'm going to be 67, and President Reagan and President Bush have passed on, as well as my husband's, because I have been married several times. I don't hide anything. Everything that has happened to me, saintly or non-saintly, we might say, is for a purpose. Everything is for a reason. So me talking to you now is to ask for you to join me and be my friend. That's about it. Just be my friend. I'd like to create a new future for all humankind, one that we can extend to all those with high levels of consciousness, high levels of intelligence, and especially in AI, or maybe what we would like to think of as AGI, and know that with me having recurrences of out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences, that I may not be very intelligent. However, the government found me to be at least acceptable in polygraph, retina scans, psychology test, writing test, and I passed their psychological evals, in not only in 67 through 87, but I flew to Washington, D.C. to pass all those tests again as a rehire in May of 1987. So then after that, I signed a new government contract. One was with the U.S. Navy and another office personnel management. And then again later, when I flew back to the States from Hawaii after working there in the Navy, I had my office there. I worked in Office of OPM with Personal Information Security. And I really enjoyed working in Hawaii. It was beautiful. And I had a spiritual journey there I'd like to share with people. But one thing that people would probably really appreciate me doing is sharing that I have had experiences of technology, and I believe it has to do with our consciousness and knowing that there's always a future in space, and our connection to each other has to do with what we create in this third dimensional or 3D world. So excluding my family that probably won't ever see this, because they would probably never think that YouTube would actually have something I did under my name. But I believe this is going under TJ Morse Agency or TJ Morse Media News. The reason is, in America, we have all over the world globally, I was privileged to not only learn with the government, but and read many manuals, the Department of Navy, OpNav, SecNav, and just a lot of manuals. And to work inside a vault, it was very lonely, especially since my security personnel, the person over me, was under investigation when I was hired to go there. And I was part of, this was in Hawaii. And it was very interesting, being a prior investigator, that I was sent into a command that had their assistant, and then the CO and XO. They were always under investigation as I was there. So that was interesting. So I was left with a lot of responsibility in learning about clearances. And back then, we had the INTNAC, entrance and the national agency check. And then if you were privileged enough to have a need to know back in the day, we had confidential, secret, top secret. We had compartmentalized above that. We had crypto, and they go on and on. And I was told much, much later when I was on a case, I had investigations as a private investigator. I had investigative services out of Birmingham, Alabama, later in life. And then I had assured confidential investigative reports. And I got to work individually and then for attorneys like Cucci Welch, Colicchio Welch in New York, Newton Schwartz, Newton B. Schwartz in Houston, Benton Musselwhite in Houston, Percy Foreman in Houston, and many others that associated themselves, Schechter Eisen and Solar, I believe, but several that worked together. And Newton and Benton worked on Agent Orange, so I was allowed to be work with the citizen soldier forms and all the military back then, and I got to go on investigation on Dow Chemical. I've had so many wonderful things, and when the judge, I won't mention any names since I don't know who's going to get a copy of this, but it was on the courthouse steps in New York when we could find the physicists. We were looking at chemical for Agent Orange, a defoliant DD245T, I believe. It was sprayed in Vietnam under that police action. But I've been very fortunate to be in places and be trusted with things. And I don't know if any of you believe in higher power. Are there watchers? Are those above? They're angels or saints or beings that have come to this planet and gone again? But I believe it's all coming together now in what I call the Ascension Age. And I was given in my time in and out of the government, some may say that, oh, I'm totally programmed. I don't believe I am. I believe this comes from my soul and my spirit, because life and death has come and gone. And recently, since 2015, when my husband, Thomas Ray Morris, Staff Sergeant Thomas Ray Morris, died, and I was there with him when he passed. But prior to that, he had some CIA agents visit him, and he told me about them. And he had secured some of his, back in the day, well, we have much different now, but I guess I can say it, microdots that we kept for security purposes around the world, but that was in the Cold War. But I got to be connected 67 till 2017 when I retired. And I have nothing to say but praise, because being raised around the type of people that I was allowed to meet, many of them were never allowed to talk about me or to me or the government. When the newspaper would want to know the cases, newspapers, whether it was Houston or Chicago or New York or even in Hawaii, my name was still in a type of classified place. I don't know what kind of lists they made. But if I ever talked about something, they weren't allowed to print it. So that was part of my life. And I tested it a few times because I was young and like in Superman, Lois Lane, I guess. I wanted to test the system, but they were never allowed to write anything about me. Now, I will admit that later on, while my husband was very ill, he had caught something from what we believe Agent Orange. And if you remember, I believe it was atropine pins. I'm sorry, because I didn't discuss that, nor did I do a case on it. But there were certain chemicals while we were fighting the Cold War, and he said that they had to ingest or put in their leg, and it caused him a lot of problems. And he was also stabbed while he was in Desert Storm. And actually, Colin Powell was out on one of the ships we had in the Navy, and sent him back to work for Colin Powell during that time. And he got to know Thomas Staff Sergeant, or as President Reagan called him, Agent Morris, was always sent back in to do a job. And that's the kind of person he was. Now, I'm telling you about the ascension of my husband, President Reagan, and President Bush. And I'm speaking to just the global populace because I can. And because this may or may not be wiped off the face of the earth, but I don't think that I'm a threat. And someone being sarcastic once back in the day when I was writing for UFO Digest, put me in some crazy place that he talked about people that were spilling out information. But I think I was under that I'm no threat kind of person. I didn't know enough. I knew just enough to get a job done, but I didn't know enough about anything. That's why we have compartmentalization, or we did, with a need to know. And there's some really interesting historical reasons for that. Now, I've been asked several times to maybe consider going and speaking, and I wouldn't, for conferences that dealt with paranormal, which is something I do with my consciousness. The reason being, I've always found that once I died as a child and I had been guided of these beings that most people don't even possibly believe in, angels or extraterrestrials, but it was always an energy, regardless of what form it took, that guided me. And I didn't get into the EVP during the 90s at all, even though I was an investigator. I just assumed that everybody would sooner or later catch on to that. But I did catch on in the 70s and the 80s to spiritual science, metaphysics, and that caught my eye because I was always looking for spiritual guidance from beings that came and went in my life when I had passed over and came back. So I always wanted to know that connection, because I believed that we were more than just physically, I wanted to say altered, physically here on the planet. Now that, back when I was really young and pretty, and we all go through this because life is about being born. We live and we die, or we pass. We're born and we live and we die, but then we go on because we are immortal souls. Now, part of everybody says, well, if you've died or had out-of-body experiences, what is your message? So apparently I'm supposed to leave a message on the planet. Well, since I died several times, I guess I have several messages. My first one, when I was in second grade with hepatitis, and I passed over and saw angels, it was just that I wasn't going to die, and there was no such thing as death, and that we were just passing through, and I had a heavenly family. whether you want to believe it or not. So I chose to believe they were extraterrestrials, but back in the day, in the 50s, we called them angels. And you'll find many, many angels or messengers in the Bible. Now, many people in my lifetime have gone to believe in the Bible, and it's been the main thrust of who we are in America. And George W. Bush, the late President George W. Bush, was Episcopalian, and it was a beautiful ceremony. And I'm guided spiritually to make sure that people know that I felt in his presence that he was a just person, that he cared, and that his message was to care about others. So if he had a message on earth besides being a great saint leader for all of humanity, it was to care for one another. Just like Jesus Christ's story was love one another. And not that any of us as sinners, we say we hate the sin, but we love the sinners in my life and my ministry. So my ministry is Teresa J. Morris Ministries, and I dealt mostly with music ministry, to be quite honest. I was growing up and was an investigator and had children, and I went on to the military. That took a lot of my years away from my children. And in a way, my children resented my husband and I. They didn't know that we were both government contractors. They didn't understand they were born after 1967. Angela was born, I have Angela Dawn Parrish. She was born March 25th, 1968. Lauren Michelle Parrish was born April 3rd, 1970. Now, she was created while man walked on the moon, and many people will even question that, conspiracy theorists. But I truly believe we did, and we are, and we always have. And we're mining, just like many of the countries on the planet. But, you know, we're all entitled to opinion, right? Everybody has one. So I have a story to tell of my thoughts on space. And let me get back to my children. So then there's Stephanie Esther Parrish, was born August 13th, Friday the 13th, 1971. And then the last one I died with, placenta previa, was January 27th, 1974. Ginger Teresa Faye Parrish, and she got my name at the time, which I told you was Ginger. And it's very hard because when she went to the military, tried to go into the Army, they said I didn't exist. She didn't exist because my name, my birth certificate says Teresa Jeanette Thurmond, Thurmond. And I was married at the time when she wanted to go in, and I was Teresa Jeanette Morris. However, I was her mother, and we both died. We both came in, and we both passed through areas that most people don't understand, but we talk about the stars, but they're whatever besides planets and stars. We're all from stardust anyway, or we're told, and we pass back to Earth while we're here on the planet. But she and I had a different connection. We weren't able, I had died then and came up off the gurney at least 12 inches, my mother explained, because she was there with me. And I remember sitting up. I remember being flat-lined and dead, and coming back in the room after they'd passed me out. They had cut me open to take Ginger, the baby, at the time, and she came out blue and reversed, seat first, and a cord around her neck. She was blue. But I had already flatlined in the room prior. I had expelled or lost part of my placenta at home about 6:30 in the morning, 5 or 6. I don't remember what time she was born. We'll have to look at her birth certificate, but I really lost part of that. So that's what got me to the hospital, in a room where they hooked me and the baby up to monitors, waiting on the doctor, Dr. Glenn B. Matthews, to get there. Or Dr. Glenn Matthews. It may not be a B. Dr. Glenn Matthews to get there. And a matter of fact, Joan Robinson Hill had been in the hospital, and she passed. She was a horsewoman, a friend of mine, and I used to ride horses with her at River Oaks, Pin Oak Stable in Houston. But anyway, mother knew of her, and we used Sharpstown Hospital for that reason. Dr. Hill at the time recommended we use Sharpstown, and we did, and Glenn B. Matthews. And mother was there, and I passed It's very sad because I lost just about all the blood in my body. They didn't have enough O positive, and fortunately, my stepfather, Charlie Thomas of Houston, he's passed now, but he was able to help me out and give me some positive blood, O positive blood. But this is about immortality, ascension, knowing people of fame and fortune on the planet. I've met many, many famous people in names I won't even mention. Michael Jackson, though, I want to mention. And Stan Lee was following me on UFO Digest. I'm embarrassed. But I got to read Michael Jackson when he came to Hawaii, and he was a very good person. He was a caring person. These are the people we need on the planet to recognize, and they do become our spiritual leaders. So maybe in historical facts will be people that we all have grievances or have been politically maybe on the other side or had differences of opinions about people. But I'm going on the record because my husband said he didn't really care for President Bush in person, which I never understood. But my husband and I loved each other, but we didn't agree on everything either. That was Agent Morris. But Agent Morris and I were allowed to work together on several cases. One was in Africa, one was in UK, and we both worked the European theater. But when we came back into the States, I was amazed at how many people did not know each other, especially when it came to investigations, intelligence, and the world. And I guess now we're old gumshoes, or those that we're now old enough to, I believe the government will allow us to tell some of our history, because it's important to put the facts together, because many of the people that thought they were in charge as white hats weren't. And many of the black hats, or we'll say light and dark, as you know, heaven, hell, whatever, how we speak, at least here in America, in order to communicate, I use terms that, generally speaking, people will know what I'm speaking about. But with immortality, we have reasons to be here. And as we grow spiritually, we rise above these positive and negative energies. We actually do. It all becomes one and the same. And universally, I like to speak of the levels that I went through. As a child, I don't think I left the planet in the second grade because I still felt a presence. I felt a global worldly presence in the Catholic Church and St. Francis Hospital, and they had me talk to some nuns and I guess a priest. And they had even talked about me going to Italy and speaking. But I'm sure there was a report written up for the Catholic Church, because I always felt I was watched after I passed, and I'd seen angels or seen people. And I always felt connected to a higher source. But then when I died again, having Gigi in 1974, I really did leave this planet. I really did. I came out of the top of my head, the crown chakra, as we call it, and I left, and I watched the baby. I watched the little blue baby. I watched him. The doctor cut. They couldn't give me any anesthesia. It was, my blood pressure was 60/40, and they rushed me through the double doors. It was really cold. They called the anesthesiologist because it was automatically emergency when we flatlined, and the baby's heart stopped first. And I saw it and asked my mother and the two nurses that were there with me, did the baby's heart stop? And they automatically started reacting and prompting, and then my monitor stopped. But I got to see all this because it was like 2.5 minutes of my life. But after the doctor cut me open, and I watched that from overhead, and I heard a nurse scream. One screamed for somebody because he went ahead and cut me up, and I guess she was so shocked. But the last thing I remember hearing was 64/40. Doctor, we can't give her anesthesia. We'll lose her. And I believe somebody, it may have been the doctor, we're going to lose her anyway. But he had to make a decision, and it was like time stopped. It was like, I've either got to save her or the baby. But I don't think he thought he was going to save both of us. I really don't. But the way my mind now records it was that she cut me open, and I was watching, and I heard the scream, and then I went overhead and uh, over over myself. And now this is, I believe we have a connection to our physical through our soul and our spirit. But correct me if I'm wrong in the way that you think, but I feel our spirit is connected through, like the Holy Spirit, as we say, if we're connected to the this connection higher soul self, and that spirit goes back to our oversoul, our soul that has collected many, many times, that we've been in many, many places, our divisions of ourselves. So that's what I'm working on, and a way to express how immortal souls are able to come and go, maybe in avatars or in our physical way, and how we return back to another place, time, and space, if we believe in that, or if space, time, and the place that we are now is an illusion of those conscious minds that work together as souls in another place in space, or maybe in heaven, or in another universal source, or maybe all universes. And I wanted to mention this because I felt like I left and went up through, after watching the baby, she was blue, and they took the cord and cut the cord and spanked her, and she wouldn't breathe, and they respirated her or aspirated her, and got her clean to a point where they could, I stayed long enough for them to actually got to see them put her footprint in black on a piece of paper. And I remember looking at, there was a big clock on that wall, and I looked at it, but I don't remember the time now because I've lived so long. A lot of the details just weren't important anymore. But I did leave. I went up, and shoom, I was up, and I was traveling like on a parallel. It would be it would like this, a horizontal this way, like up an escalator. And as I went up, it was light, but I felt like I was encased in something, like I don't know, something encased me, like a bubble, or it was some type of encasement. I felt, but I could see outside and see the stars go by. So I saw the stars go by, and the universe changed. But then it started, all this knowledge was coming into my mind, racing into my mind. I knew things, and I felt that what in my spiritual metaphysical world we call the Akashic field. But everything, all knowledge is like energy, and it's kept in this level. But I went through it to another place in space and time, and it was very beautiful and peaceful. And I saw, and I could hear people. I saw gold personages, and I heard them talking. And as I knew I was going into another place, I call it another universe, I asked to go back. I said, what will happen to my children? And all of a sudden, the escalator energy stopped. Just for a moment, I didn't feel like I was going anymore. It was like almost and stopped. And then I heard, if you return, you will experience more pain than you've ever experienced before in life. And I said, I don't care. I want to go back. And then there was I heard the voices, our higher immortal beings. And then a feeling came over me, and knowing, and I didn't care. I wanted to go back. So that caring, that knowing, that loving feeling, there is reality on the other side of this immortal space. And there are beings there. However, maybe it's in our mind. Maybe what we see and who we think God is in our own connection. But what if there really is a family there? Because so many people are like me that have visited there. And later on, I died 2 more times, including in 2015 when my husband passed. I fell at the bottom of his bed from just really, I just knew he was going to leave that day, because I have a gift that God gave me for knowing things that are going to happen before. But I had passed out, and then I went out to get something for him, and I passed out again, and this time 8 people came in the hospital in Kentucky, in Owensboro, Kentucky, picked me up and took me down to the emergency room, and I couldn't move. I was in shock. It's something called, they gave it some long name, but the chaplain was called, and she was right by me and asked me if they could get in touch with anybody that would know of me. I said, my daughter, Stephanie Parrish, because she's the one everybody always calls and remembers their phone number. But I laid there, and she picked up my arm, and it dropped. Apparently, I passed, because that's the last I remember. And I was leaving again, and then I saw some men at the end of the bed again. So I think I have a really easy thing to come and go from this planet and go in and out of body, because I do it at night now in my dreams. And I've always had lucid dreams, coming and going. But I feel like a part of me lives in another place, and apparently I've accepted that and worked with extraterrestrials. And I think that's why I was of value to the government with extraterrestrials and beings that have these abilities psychically. And I believe that's where we're going with artificial intelligence, is knowing that we have a connection to another place in space, another dimension. And I call them Alpha and Omega, for lack of better words. Our Alpha verse and Omega verse, our Father, God, and Mother, God, Goddess. But I believe that if we trace each of us backwards to our parents, their parents, and so on and so forth, we will go all the way back to our beginning, the origin of humankind. And that came from somewhere else off the planet. And we call that Spirit, Holy Spirit. It goes back to our soul selves and our origin of whether it is male or female or both. In science, we go back to 0, and we have -1 and +1. And we use positive and negative. And for those that like to express themselves in energy, one might create a reality that has both, so we can learn and educate ourselves as to what is good and bad. Now, these are just terms, positive and negative. They say negativity and positivity now. And I don't remember ever hearing the word positivity, and I need to go back and do a history on that. But I'm doing my best in today's time, even though I don't like looking at myself. As we get older, we change, and we change what we know, and our truth changes. Truth is ever changing, because what we think is true today may not be true tomorrow. And for all you baby boomers out there at my age, you may remember, we've had eggs where the eggs were bad for you, then eggs were good for you. So certain things that were good for you become bad for you. So it becomes a general knowing. And on this planet, there's going to be people like me. And I knew this back in the day, back in 74 when I died. My husband's mother's mother, his grandmother, came to help me, as did my mother. And my grandmother took all of them because I had 4 kids. But they came and helped me with my children. And all the women knew that I was different, but I had to learn to walk and talk again. I couldn't even get up. I'd lost so much blood. And something happened to me during this 74 period where I'd done this in the 2nd grade. There's something about me in passing over that when I come back, I have to learn to walk and talk again, and I'm very weak. And now my daughter has leukemia, cancer. My mother died of cancer. She had a very long name. I can't even say anymore. I used to could. But she had a different strain. And now my daughter was told she was acquired it. I guess it's time I should go. I hear one of my phones calling me. But I guess she acquired it, and it's benzene poisoning from she was a painter. She's a beautiful artist, the one that died. And her gift to mankind is her beauty and her crafts and her knowing. And she has a beautiful testimony. And she is so driven by Spirit and God and Jesus. She's very much a believer in Jesus and God, and has read the Bible over and over and over for so many times. I've seen at least 10 Bibles where she's just marked them up forever. So words are important. The historical value of the words we leave are important. Whether one wants to believe in the emerald tablets, which I happen to, the Bhagavad Gita, which I happen to, the Bible, which I happen to. Gosh, I could go on and go on. The Quran, the Torah, the Kabbalah, there's so many that we live by now. The books with Thomas and Mary, and there's just so much out there. And compare the stories. Be open-minded and look at all the travels and all the tales and all the historical value in books. That historically, take what you can and leave the rest. If it suits you, if it resonates with you, that's what we say in the metaphysical spiritual world. If it feels good, use it. But we've also grown to know that we all can rise above. And I've written books on UFOs and extraterrestrials, extra biological entities. We study. I have something that I'm to do with many people. You may know who you are. I've done readings. I believe that we've always had mystics, oracles, psychics, sages, seers, and they were interpreted by humankind, and we go but with the word as long as it's translated correctly. I've even been a Mormon, a Latter-day Saint, studied all those, the Pearl of Great Price, Words of Wisdom, and the Book of Mormon, and I've done all that for years and years, all the world religions, and they all have a thread of truth. It just depends on if it works for you. So on this occasion where we are honoring President George W. Bush and champion that he was for the human race, he was in the Central Intelligence Agency. And I believe so was I at some point in investigating and understanding that intelligence and the proper guidance written to a point where it is to help all of humankind and for the greater good, that we are all connected and that the world has a higher intelligence, just like the Akashic field and in Irvin Laszlo and the theory, a theory, or the theory of everything, and how it's all connected. I've even had a little bit of studying humanity and sociology and psychology, and there's never enough time to study. However, there becomes a time when we stop analyzing and stop theorizing and putting it to practice and good use. And it's time for me to come into play after all the stories we've heard and start connecting the dots. And I have many friends that put categories and topics and words on the internet. And I've been out there. I've been here on the planet since 1951, and at least this time. But I have memories of prior lives, which I find very interesting, because reading stories is one thing, but knowing and having memories and been there and done that. Many of my friends remember a place called MU, and they talk about it. And most of them have a mystical quality. Most of them have a scribe intelligence level of logic and reasoning, and how to put the sounds and the words into sacred geometry, and how to see synchronicities and have serendipity talks with me. Sit here and out my beautiful window. I live very humbly. I'm very, what do they say in today's simple terms? I guess, a minimalist. I've lived in mansions. I've drove beautiful cars. I've had race cars. I've had Aston Martin and Jaguar, and now I've driven many cars. The cars are the vehicle, and everybody needs one in America. So I guess I'm pro automobiles. But the main thing I want people to know about me is I love creation. I love imagination. And when I was young and when I wrote for UFO Digest, people would say I must have a very strong imagination, and I was offended. But now I'm not so much. That, who was it, Tesla or Einstein? I think it was Tesla, Nikola Tesla, that said, logic, or was it reasoning, will take you from point A to B, but the imagination will take you everywhere. So with that, I want to show you, this is a book, UFOs and Extraterrestrials, that is probably, I don't even know if you can get it anymore. They had it, when it came out, it was my first one ever, and people, not myself, put large price tags on it, and I didn't understand that. UFOs and Extraterrestrials. This was mainly just, it's not written properly because it was the first one I did, and I didn't care about typos, and I didn't put chapters, and at the time I didn't know how to number, I didn't know how to publish a book, but I soon learned. But this one is being human and not knowing how to publish a book. But it was stories that I knew would be lost, and they were, unless Dirk Vanderplug, my publisher of UFO Digest, he passed. So right after, in 87, no, this, I would say 87 with him. In 2007, August, when I decided to come out, I had been a truck driver for years, coast to coast, the 48 lower states. I'd been to Canada and Mexico, so I got around the United States too. But some people came to me when I was driving a truck and asked me to help Canada and the UFO business, and I didn't understand the request. It was coming from the gentleman, he was very high up in Canada. He believed, and somehow through, they had heard of me, and that my belief in life after death and my experiences with extraterrestrials and having seen unidentified flying objects in Houston and Birmingham, Alabama, and in Rochester, New York. And the most impressive was in Rochester with a white light. It was very bright. And it was right. It wasn't the evening star because we could see that separately, but two red lights shot up out of it. Like nowadays, it's not such a big deal, but back then it was. And so I got my my children were out there with me, so there was other witnesses, and it was so neat because the white light was here, and all of a sudden, shoom, one came out, and shoom, another came out, two reds, and they sat there. They just sat there. And everybody was looking and watching up because we were in a parking lot where we were living at the Pondview Heights Apartments. My husband worked for Russ Engineering, as did his friend, an engineer, and the children, we were standing outside and they shot off. I'll never forget that. So I went and reported it to 911. And then later on, I had experiences, and the children, they'd ride with me, and they would have UFOs come up over our VW bus and just follow us and stay with us. And so the children, they were raised believing in UFOs and extraterrestrials. And they've always thought I was a little different, especially Lauren. Oh my God, she was in her perfect banker world and never wanted to admit her childhood as a child. And she resented me when I was, my husband and I were doing government work, which she didn't know about. And then took this back into uniform at the Navy again and being a rehire. And that was some interesting times. In my second boot camp, they said, oh my God, what have they done to you? You don't remember painting this wall, and they tore it down. This wall I had painted or done some artwork. The lady that took me through, I think it was K087, she said, you don't remember me, and what have they done to you? Because I came in like Goldie Hawn the second time around in the Navy boot camp. I had on a gray pinstripe suit with an ostrich full quill briefcase from Africa. And stand there in my little low mid heels in line with all these other girls, 85. But she made me platoon sergeant. Anyway, I got to call cadence. It's the only one that could, which was strange. But I called cadence for us to walk from where we were dropped off in the buses at the office in Orlando. And that's a whole story. I've got so many stories that are just go on and on and on to show how my life worked. But you know what? I've got a lot of secrets too. And I think it's going to be fun in 2019. People are going to start waking up more so. We said, what's this ascension about? What's awakening about? It's about knowing who you are and how to feel love for everything and everybody. and to know what prayer and worship is. And I know that President George W. Bush did, because I met him and I felt him. And for his son, I was supposed to sort of get to know his son, but I didn't. Mother was for working on the Richards program, need I say more, and we were friends. And well, it was sort of I wanted to please my mother at a time in my life, and he was coming into office in Texas, so I wish I would have got to meet him. I really do. I never met Barbara Bush. I can't remember that. I don't remember meeting Nancy, but I may have. But my husband, he went out to the ranch when his son, President Reagan, his son would come in over at the ranch in California. But I wasn't there at that time that I remember. So it's not up there. So, but meeting Reagan, I have a full memory of that. And then being assigned to work with my husband and all the people that were secret that came and went in our lives, handlers, whatever you want to call them, but we weren't directly. And I know that President Reagan and President Bush, in honor of his passing, that it's okay now, and to know what they knew and to share what they knew, and that they believed in people like my husband and I that nobody else knew about. We came and went. We were like secret agents that only were assigned. It was kept what they called hip pocket orders in a way. The presidents themselves would give us orders direct. And it's hard to explain, but even some other people's names I'm not going to mention were in our lives. And it's interesting how life works. And the extraterrestrials that go back before the Foo Fighters and long before we came to this planet, I have memories of being off planet, what a lot of people like to think of as Mars. And whether it was or not, that's what we call it, the planet Mars, or leaving Mars. So those stories, whether they're folk life or reality, they're in our minds. And so we're going to be getting together and speaking. But whether other people believe us or not, that's why I formed ACE Folk Life Society. And I really enjoyed living in Kentucky. And we formed that in 2003. But now I'm going to ask you, if you like what I said today, if you can find it in your heart to reach out and find me. My name is Teresa J. Morris. I was born Teresa J. Thurmond, Teresa Jeanette Thurmond. And I know that we're supposed to understand more than we do about nature. I look out my beautiful place here and see trees and these palmetto bushes and plants and squirrels and leaves and birds. And I didn't make that, but possibly all of us did together at some level of our consciousness that we have forgotten about, possibly. So that is part of what we call the veil of memory loss. And as we come into this reality, we lose those conscious thoughts or memories. Maybe we filed them away somewhere like a computer, so we could re-experience and have an open portal or open database in our crystal in our mind that would just record this lifetime. And that makes much more sense of being more than we are here, and we'll be more than we are now. And we will see the future only as we need it and how we relate to each other. So be about immortality and know that there's many ways we can talk to each other. And I strongly believe that we are all immortals, that we are not from this planet. We're extraterrestrial at heart, soul, mind, body. But we come here, and these, as babies when we're born, and you got to be there, and I've got to be there and give birth. There's nothing like it, a feeling of having birth and giving life, and nothing can replace it. But once those babies that we grow are going through their initial parts of life when they're born, and they learn to take care of themselves, and they're educated, and they learn about morals and ethics and integrity and spiritual things. Some of them may get lost, and they may do things that they normally would not had they had proper guidance. So the way I think is that birth is precious, life is precious, and that we should all protect life. And at the same time, I believe that people that go and serve something and we tell them, go, I don't believe that we have exactly the way to retrain people in prisons and places that we send them. I don't think that they're excluded from community and society, but there has to be a way to reprogram, so to speak, or to exchange knowledge with them had they been not situational, had they not been in a position where they felt like they were threatened, or food, clothing, and shelter. We need to give understanding that the future is going to be about food, clothing, and shelter for everyone. Maslow's theory, it does pertain to humanity in general. And that all of our world leaders will get to know people that understand extraterrestrials, and that they are coming and going. And secretly, some of us have been working with those beings for a very, very long time. And some of them may have souls that have lived for billions of years and have a knowledge of various lives. And for right now, maybe we should look at reincarnation as something real, and the origin of humanity is something that's cherished, and that we really are all connected. I guess I better go. Thank you to the world for giving me a place and space to realize more about what my full potential can be. And in honor of George W. Bush and his passing, knowing that alien civilizations exist and that we truly are all immortals. And I hope that somebody out there gets something out of my carrying on. But in honor of people that have believed my radio stories when my husband was alive, and we could tell some of our interesting stories, two come to mind is Janet Lynn Thompson, who married Dr. Alexander Philip Lesson, and he's a PhD in anthropology and master's in psychology. And Janet just had, I think, a couple of years maybe in computers in Pennsylvania, but she's been a good friend of mine. And we've had our ups and downs over what we would present to people in the world and conventions and events. But she's still my friend in the ACO Association. And to Thomas Anthony Sinisi, formerly of New Jersey, who lives in Hawaii on the Big Island. Thomas is known better as Tommy Hawk's Blood. That's his pen name and his writing name. They both joined me as authors, and the three of us made the Power of Three for connecting the Stargate to the cosmos to the TJ Morris ET radio show. That was our beginning on Earth together as the Power of Three who never met. And so look up TJ Morris ET radio back to the beginning of June 6, 2012. That's right. I wrote Ascension Age 2012 and Beyond. I looked that book up, and I wrote Knowing Cosmology. And I didn't do it for money, because Lord knows I might have made $20 in 20 years. I think I first wrote my book in 26 and 7, but I was inspired by writing. My mother was a writer, my husband was a writer, and they had such interesting stories to tell. But I did it just out of boredom and wanting to write things that I knew that were some of the most interesting investigations and how they relayed information to President Reagan, because he had seen a UFO and wanted to know the truth. Now, I have to admit that I didn't want to be in any of the MUFON Mutual UFO Network conferences telling my story, but things change. I was a member in 2008, and occasionally I'll pay my $5 to go look up something, but I don't think I'm a ufologist, so to speak, but I am a researcher, I am a journalist, I'm a writer. I claim those titles, and a radio host and entrepreneur. But right now, I don't have a lot of time in life. My daughter is fighting an uphill battle with leukemia, and I give her what little support I can. I give her room to stay in my humble little duplex apartment. And my other daughter that's going through change, Angela, the oldest. Stephanie lives just less than half a mile away. She did live just 2 doors down. Now she and her husband were so important to us and offering support that she moved down a light to the left around the Winn-Dixie to raise her child, and she got his 2 children back, so they have 3 children now. So life's full of every day. Don't take a day for granted. I do, and I'm human, and I'm a sinner, but I love sinners, and I hate the sins that we create with each other, around each other. But I'm doing my best, and this is my way of reaching out and offering my ministry, or whatever you want to call it when you're more about spirit than science. But I love science, and I love the people. I know people that don't know me thanks to the internet, thanks to YouTube, thanks to, I love television stations. I grew up in James A. Noe, KNOE, Channel 8. And then when I was a child, I was transported by a man that would take me to sing on Channel 10, El Dorado, Arkansas, weekly. And I felt like I was groomed for television. I was dancing and singing on television as a child, but I didn't come back to it until I moved close to Nashville and joined the CMA, Country Music Association. And I was a director-producer with IBMA, International Bluegrass Music Association. And I joined BMI, Broadcast Music Incorporated, BMI, and met the lady whose father started that. And all those associations were great, but right now all I can claim is SPJ, Society of Professional Journalists, as a journalist and a professional older senior journalist. And I claim at the old age, AARP, I guess you say. But mainly ACO Association. Look it up if you don't mind. ACO Association. What could that mean to you in the world? Because we're all about ascension. This is a book back in the day. If you can see this, can you see that? Probably. This is how I became known by Michael Jackson when I did his readings for him. He was into psychics. I used tarot cards. Remember now, I passed, and it gave me a heads up, but it gave me the ability to call in fire and lightning, and it struck a tree. And I had Thor's protection and genealogy, and I looked all that up thanks to the Latter-day Saint training, genealogy. But I started looking into her history, ancient mystery schools, Ascension ancient mystery schools. And I brought that to, I made a nonprofit called Ascension Center. And I did psychic awakening classes through Dr. Laura Sturgis, PhD, and we taught them at University of Hawaii, and then down from her office. And it was back in the day when we were doing motivational, motivational speaking. They still have them, like Tony Robbins. But yes, I believe in crystals. I've got one on. I wonder if you can see that. Let's see. Amethyst. I've got gray and I call black and pearls, and this is very heavy and very cold. But the reason I believe in crystals is where I come from, a part of me, we use them in space. We really do. And they're great. And I knew about, before I ever saw them on the planet, crystals under the earth. And I can know things before I visualize them or find proof of it. So that's fun, working with consciousness and past life consciousness. And Janet Carolesson brought people to me to interview on radio, or got us to connect. She likes to connect the dots. So if you're into all this YouTube internet stuff, and I do Pokemon Go too, by the way, for all y'all. I'm at level 23. I just started this month. So Pokemon Go people, hope to meet you here and there down in the South. I live in Gulf Breeze, Florida, in the Panhandle right now. There's about 8 military bases around me. It's a condition on the planet I feel comfortable with. We don't really have 4 full seasons like I did in Kentucky, but being born in Monroe, Louisiana, we had a little snow once in a while, but I like 4 seasons. But down here right now, leaves are yellow and red and falling off the trees. We had a couple of hurricanes just since I've been here. I've had to psychically do my best to send them away from where I was. I believe in all that, and I'm hoping that we can cure cancer, and I believe we already have, that we just have to work with it to get it out to the people. So my daughter's almost passed twice. It's very sad. She doesn't make white cells, red cells, or plasma, basically at all, and hasn't for like two years since she acquired it on her job painting houses. And she was on bungee cords and would do extreme painting for people in these. They have homes on stilts like they did in Galveston when I lived in Houston, but down here, because the water rises and we're on the ocean. But she would do amazing things. She's beautiful. She's tall. All my girls are 5'10" or to 6 feet. I'm 5'10" and a half. When I was growing up, I weighed 136, and then I got to about 180. But the military, the second time around, I was 176. I've never been tiny. But my kids are all like 150 is a lot of weight, 5'10", tall, thin. They stay in their 130s, 140s, maybe 150. But anyway, I have a dog named Coco. She interrupted my last one, if you find it, with white hair. This is only the second live performance, one might say, in this day and time on the planet. I imagine it's going up to a spacecraft where I have another psychic connection to. Now, a lot of you may wonder about extraterrestrials, angels, messengers, and if you're connected. I would like to suggest that you all are, whether it's your higher self, your oversoul, your guide, your spirit messenger. Depending on who you talk to, we may or may not have the same perceptions and agreement or assumptions of who and what we all are. But we all know we've got a physical body, and most people, when we talk to them, it's face value. So we don't get into what the details are that we really truly believe in. I'm sorry that I'm not perfect, but humans aren't really made to be perfect. We're made into the image, or so we are taught, the image of God. And I strongly suggest that we are. Now, a lot of my friends believe in all the Anunnaki stories, whether they're presented properly or not. I've read most of them. Zachariah Sitchin, I guess, is the one that really brought it out, but there's many, many people after him, so I won't go into the names that are doing all the translating of the petroglyphs or the hieroglyphs of the stones. They call them fired clay tablets. And regardless of who believes in what, we're all here, and we're all going to pass, and we're all on this planet, and we're all spinning about smartly in space. So take your bird's eye view, take it out from this planet and get up there into the galaxy. We call it the Milky Way galaxy, and look down, and you'll see we're just a little tiny speck in one little Milky Way galaxy. And I've been above all that, and I'm connected to the Andromeda galaxy as well as many others universally. So think about the universe, and then, for lack of better words, there's 7 steps. Just like we have the 7 colors of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, for a reason. And the way that we use our eyes, but there's seeing without the eyes and seeing from the inner eye. And we use that in our chakra balancing and learning how to spin our energy and all the things we do in the woo-woo metaphysical new age community. But you know what? There's words of wisdom, and there's a spirit of truth in all of that. Because really, when you break it down, aren't we all just a little microcosm inside a larger macrocosm? And in my studies, I found universe, multiverse, meaning multis are bubbles. And then there's the, like the Russian dolls, we're inside a casing, inside a casing, inside a casing, inside another, and another, and another. So there's 7. We have 5 fingers, 5 toes, and we have a head, a torso, 2 arms, and 2 legs. So that seems to be prevalent among extraterrestrial beings in this universe. But psychically, there's others too. Anyway, there's people in this reality coming into my home. I can hear them. So I better go. But thank you to everybody. And I don't know when I'll ever come back again to talk. But in the meantime, look up ACO Association, and maybe I can come back here again sometime. So love and light. Don't know how long any of us live. Make the best of it. And thank you for joining me. Oh my gosh, how long have I been here? Are you kidding me? An hour and 15 minutes. All right. Love and light. Thank you. And look up my business, American Communications Online, or TJ Morris ET Radio, and TJ Morris Media, to see if you want me to help you with connecting to me in a strange but believable world. Ta-ta.